There are truths that only reveal themselves when we dare to step beneath even the shadow of who we think we are. In the employee bathroom, beneath a flickering fluorescent light, a woman stood silently, tightening the elastic of her ponytail. The mirror, foggy and cracked at the corners, reflected a pale, weary face. Her lipstick had faded. Dark circles underlined tired eyes. Her black uniform was too large. It was second-hand, bought from a thrift store. Pinned to her chest, a name tag that read Lena Morales. But the truth is, her name isn't Lena. She's Vivian Reyes, the founder of the renowned La Merenda restaurant chain, once featured on the cover of Taste magazine, once celebrated as the sorceress of Seattle's palate. This same woman now standing among broken tiles, bleach-scented air, and flickering lights had once worn $1,000 blazers and toasted champagne with mayors on opening nights. Now, she was about to clock in for her shift at the very restaurant she had built with a false name. This wasn't a challenge, it was an investigation. 3 months ago, Vivian believed she was running a brand to be proud of elegant cuisine, a refined ambience, a well-trained team. But then complaints began to pile up, not about the food, but something deeper. 1-star reviews flooded in, not critiquing the menu, but speaking of a toxic atmosphere, employees being publicly humiliated. That's when Vivian knew something inside her empire was rotting. She tried checking the systems, installed hidden cameras, made surprise visits. But every time, it was the same flawless performance staff smiling warmly, service running smoothly, managers waving from afar with practiced cheer. She had trusted Bryce Kessler, her operations manager, trusted him so deeply she handed him the reins to hiring, scheduling, handling complaints. But the words "everything's fine" started to sound more like a script, a rehearsed play. And then she made a decision she never thought she'd make, to go undercover as a minimum wage employee, starting from zero, stepping into the very place she had built to see what was left when her name no longer followed her around on a business card. Vivian sent her young daughter, Sophia, to stay with her aunt. "Mommy's going on a work trip for a few days," she said, turning away before her daughter could see the tears in her eyes. She swapped SIM cards, rented a cheap room, had a close friend create a fake resume. The night before her first day, she couldn't sleep, not because she feared she wouldn't perform well, but because she was afraid of finding something she didn't want to believe was true. At 4:30 a.m., she stood outside the back door of La Merenda, the flagship location on First Hill. Seattle, the very first child she gave birth to after a tear-soaked divorce. The door creaked open. A young man with curly hair and paint-stained fingers smiled faintly. "You must be Lena." "Right, I'm Nico. Welcome to the Funhouse prison." His tone was sarcastic, but in his eyes there was a quiet warning. Vivian smiled and nodded. And with that, she stepped into the dark corners of the very dream she had once traded her entire youth to build. The hallway behind the restaurant kitchen had never looked so worn. The same white walls, the same grey tiles, but stripped of her title. Vivian saw it all differently, stained with grease, tinged yellow with age, and carrying a musty odor that clung like a secret no one dared speak. "This way," Nico whispered, nudging open the door to the staff locker room. "Best if you keep out of management's sight for now." Vivian nodded cautiously, offering a tight smile, staying true to the character she'd built, a single mother just trying to get by. But even with all her mental preparation, she hadn't expected this. Barely 10 minutes in, and the trial had already begun. "So this is Lena." "Right." A sharp, high-pitched voice cut through the hallway. A woman with platinum blonde hair and bold red lipstick approached in a perfectly tailored uniform, fitted down to the centimeter. Vivian recognized her from internal reports. Trina Walsh, a recently promoted shift lead, celebrated for her outstanding performance and positive contributions. But the way she looked at Vivian was less admiration, more inspection, like spotting a stain on a pristine tablecloth. "You're the special hire Bryce mentioned." Trina tilted her head. "He said something about a single mum desperate for work." Vivian felt her body tense, but she gave a small nod. "I'm ready to work hard." "Let's hope so." Trina smirked. "This ain't a charity kitchen." Bryce appeared right then, almost like it had been staged. His eyes scanned her from head to toe, lingering everywhere but her eyes. "Oh, this is the promising new recruit." "Huh," he said without offering a handshake. "Let's hope we don't regret giving you a shot." Vivian kept her hands from clenching. "Yes, I'm truly grateful." "That uniform's kinda baggy," Bryce muttered, eyeing her again. "Customers don't like sloppy. Fix it yourself." "Yes, sir." Those 2 words, "good girl," came out soft as air, but stung like a slap to the face. Vivian was assigned the lunch shift. Trina called it the dead zone. No customers, no tips, no chance. But for Vivian, it was the perfect window to observe. While other staff tended to their familiar stations, Trina kept her circling the dining area, making her wipe down already clean tables, resorting utensils that were already sorted. She sent her to fetch supplies from the stockroom, only to sigh dramatically upon her return, as if Vivian had just murdered the soul of a Caesar salad. "You walk like a damn penguin. Who trained you? You're holding that tray all wrong. Again, why do you breathe so heavy? Who wants to eat next to a steam engine?" Vivian didn't react. She simply nodded, bowed her head, and mentally recorded every word, not for revenge, but to understand how petty power could be wielded like a blade. Nico kept glancing at her with quiet concern. He opened his mouth a few times, only to close it again. Vivian understood. He'd been here long enough to know speaking up could mean walking out for good. In the middle of a 5-star restaurant, with its elegant patrons dining on Canadian lobster and New Zealand lamb, there was a scent more pungent than any fermented reduction wafting from the kitchen, the reek of cruelty made ordinary. Vivian tied her hair back, tightened her apron, and whispered to herself, "Keep going. We'll dig to the bottom and find out exactly where the cracks began." As noon approached, Vivian stepped into the dining area, balancing a tray of waters with her head lowered, not in submission, but to listen, to observe, to feel. The restaurant buzzed to life. Sunlight spilled through the glass, lighting up the room, but nothing gleamed quite like Trina. Strutting over and leaning close to whisper in Vivian's ear, Don't think stepping into the guest area means you're serving. You do the crap no one else wants to touch. Got it? Vivian smiled faintly, nodding just like any low-ranking staffer who knew her place. For 2 full hours, Trina never took her eyes off her. Vivian was sent back and forth between zones, but never once allowed to serve a table. Every surface she cleaned was soon re-wiped by someone else, and every time, Trina would curl her lip and mutter, "Look at this." Streaks again. Ever heard of a glass cloth? Or you're holding that tray like you're hauling discount bins. Start over. Even the way she stood while waiting for customers was a problem. That stance. You look half asleep. Fix your posture. Every word felt like a needle, never enough to draw blood, but sharp enough to leave a slow, accumulating wound deep in her pride. Vivian had once been a keynote speaker at a summit on gender equity in the workplace. She'd been invited to speak at university hospitality programs. But standing here in a hand-me-down uniform and shoes that bit at her heels, she felt like a first grader being humiliated by a bitter teacher for not drawing her cursive letters just right. Amidst the barking commands, Trina laughed with customers and casually chatted with her favorite co-workers, performing a polished version of kindness that created the illusion Lena was the problem, not the system. The other staff, those who'd seen this act before, kept their eyes down. A few glanced at Vivian with fleeting sympathy, then quickly turned away. No one said a word. No one stepped in, because in this place, if you didn't want to become prey, you had to pretend you didn't see it happening. By the end of the lunch shift, as the crowd began to thin, Trina walked over and dropped a thick wine menu into Vivian's hands. "Memorize this. I'm testing you tomorrow." Vivian nodded, taking it. It was the very same menu she had once written the opening notes for, but Trina didn't know that. And don't ask stupid questions. Last newbie asked me what the difference was between Pinot Noir and Merlot. I threw her straight into kitchen duty. Understood. Trina stared at her for a few seconds, then delivered one final line, casual, but laced with venom. "But honestly, don't stress too much about studying. You don't exactly look like someone who's gonna last past tomorrow." Vivian nodded. Not because she agreed, but because she was recording everything. Every cruel remark, every suppressive command, every form of professional sabotage disguised beneath slogans like "strictness preserves standards," all of it was being recorded. Every second. At the end of her shift, she returned to the staff locker room and sank into an old chair pushed against the wall, her back drenched in sweat, her feet burning, her throat dry and raw. She looked at her phone. The recording was still running. 1 hour and 47 minutes. Vivian leaned her head against the wall, took a deep breath. I used to stand on stage and give talks about human-centered leadership. But maybe to truly understand it, I needed to walk through every level of inhumanity. She let out a quiet chuckle, pressed her lips together, and stood up. The game had only just begun. Friday, the busiest day of the week, began with a rushed message scribbled on the whiteboard in the staff room: "Tonight, all senior servers must report to the VIP section. No mistakes." Trina, Vivian read the note and felt something off, not about the customers, but about how carefully Trina had chosen her words. 6:30 p.m. The dining area was filling quickly. Warm, golden light spilled across polished tables. The clinking of glasses, the scrape of forks on porcelain, the soft murmur of conversations wove together a symphony of elegance. Vivian stepped out with a wine tray in hand. On it, handed directly to her by Trina, was a bottle of Chateau Margaux 2015, worth nearly $300. Table 12, VIP guests. "Don't spill it," Trina said firmly, then added with a wink, "And if you screw up, at least apologize gracefully." Vivian nodded, carrying the bottle carefully toward the designated area. But as she reached the table, she froze. Table 12, according to the directions, was occupied by a young couple in casual wear, giggling over appetizers and scrolling through TikTok. They didn't look like regulars. They certainly didn't look like the kind who would order a high-end Bordeaux. Meanwhile, just a few feet away at table 10, an older woman in pearls and a distinguished gentleman in a tailored blazer were giving her a puzzled look. "Excuse me, dear. We only ordered the house red. Are you sure that's for us?" Vivian looked at the label, looked at the table number, looked back at the menu, and then it hit her. This was a setup. Before she could say a word, Trina appeared right on cue, like she'd been waiting behind her the entire time. "Oh my God, what are you doing?" The shrill voice pierced the air louder than necessary, just loud enough for the nearby tables to pause their conversations. "You're trying to serve the Margaux to the wrong table. My God, do you even know what that bottle is worth? This is a restaurant, not some noodle shack on the side of the road." Vivian gripped the bottle so tightly her hand began to tremble. I'm sorry. You just what? Just ruined the entire guest experience. I told you, table 12, didn't I?" That's when Bryce emerged from the office area, wearing a look of solemn authority, as if he'd just come from a board meeting. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice sharp. "This girl." Trina turned toward him, voice trembling just enough to sound wounded, almost served a premium wine to the wrong table. "I've tried to guide her, but she's careless." Bryce gave Vivian a long, cold stare, just like the one he'd given her on her first day. Inside, now, the break room felt eerily quiet. Vivian sat across from Bryce. No cameras, no customers, just the dull glow of a flickering fluorescent light above his face, now stiff with irritation. "What do you think you're doing? I didn't mean to. Maybe the table numbers got..." "You don't get to think. You're here to follow instructions. This is a place of service, not a playground for amateurs." Vivian bit the inside of her lip, holding her voice steady. "I understand." "Good. Since you understand, you'll be moved to dishwashing, effective immediately, away from the guest area. We're not risking any more expensive accidents." Trina peeked her head in, her triumphant smile practically glowing. "Oh, Lena, told you. This place just isn't for you." Vivian walked into the kitchen like a ghost. No one spoke to her. The air was thick with steam, dish soap, and the clatter of pans. Nico was nowhere to be seen. No one checked on her. Every gaze either averted or ignored. But in her apron pocket, her phone screen still glowed. The recording was still running. She had just been humiliated deliberately, theatrically, with witnesses. And now, with evidence, in the hot, greasy air of the kitchen. Vivian set the detergent bottle down and leaned against the cold stainless steel counter. They want me to quit. But what they don't know is that this exact moment is the moment I decided I won't let anyone else go through this. Vivian turned her head toward the kitchen doors where warm yellow light still glowed on the other side. Tonight, they'd won a round, but the real battle had just begun. After the wrong table wine incident, Vivian was shoved into the most forgotten corner of the restaurant, the vegetable prep station. Dim lighting, no air conditioning, no one watching, no one caring. She stood alone, in front of buckets of tomatoes, shallots, and radishes. Her knife moved steadily, each slice mechanical, almost meaningless. But in her mind, the reel was spinning, replaying every moment from earlier like an old film looping back to the start. They don't just want to humiliate me, they want me gone. A few minutes later, Trina showed up. The fake smile for guests was gone, the chirpy tone for co-workers gone. What remained was her real face, sharp, cold, and blade-like. "You know something." "Lena," Trina said, leaning against the walk-in fridge, arms folded. "I've seen girls like you before, trying to impress, pretending to be sweet. But in the end, they cry, they quit, they blame the world." Vivian kept slicing tomatoes, silent. Trina stepped closer, lowered her voice dripping with venom. "You think you're special, think your little sob story earns you extra chances. Trust me, I've dealt with tougher girls than you. I don't think anything," Vivian answered softly, eyes still on the cutting board. "It's the way you carry yourself," Trina hissed. "Worn-out shoes, that timid look, always flashing those desperate little please give me a chance eyes. It's pathetic." She paused, then let out a breathy, bitter laugh. "You're too old to start over, too slow to keep up, and too plain for customers to even remember you. And customers don't come here to see ordinary. They come to see perfection. You just remind them of what they are tired, broke, and failing." Vivian's hand shook for a second, not out of fear, but because she knew. The recorder was still running. Every word, every drop of acid, captured. Trina still had no idea who she was really talking to. She still thought she was crushing some helpless single mum beneath her heel. But the truth was, Trina had just looped the noose around her own neck. "You know how long Bryce and I have worked to keep this place out of the hands of amateurs," Trina continued, her voice tightening with pride. "You're just a trial run, a charity case, the kind of person we bring in just to prove why you don't belong here." Vivian looked up, and in that brief moment their eyes locked, and Trina took a step back, not because she knew the truth, but because in Vivian's eyes something had changed. No more submission, no more fear. What was left was resolve. "Well, You should thank me anyway, Trina said, smoothing her hair with a flick. I just taught you your first real lesson about the service industry. Either you make the guest feel special or you get replaced by someone prettier, faster, better at kissing ass. Then she walked away. No goodbye, no remorse. The door clicked shut behind her. Only Vivian remained and the soft beep of the recording. She closed the app, saved the file. On her phone screen, a title appeared, Recording Saved, Trina Walsh Abuse Evidence 1. Vivian set the knife down, raised her head. 1 recording might be an accident. 2 means it's a system. I don't have to say a word. All I have to do is let them expose themselves. She picked the knife back up, kept chopping. Her hands no longer trembling, no longer tired. Every wound she took today would become evidence tomorrow. Around 9 p.m., the restaurant had begun to quiet down after the rush hour storm. Vivian was still in the prep corner, slicing onions, eyes stinging. Every layer she peeled away didn't feel like vegetables anymore. It felt like stripping back the rot from the polished mask La Merenda wore to the world. Then, from behind, a soft voice. "Lena, you okay?" Vivian looked up. It was Nico, the young kitchen hand, who had greeted her that first morning. He handed her a bottle of water. "I saw what happened with the wine earlier. It wasn't fair. Everyone knows that was on Trina." Vivian took the bottle, kept her voice steady. "Does stuff like that happen a lot here?" Nico hesitated, then sat down on a small plastic chair beside her. "More than you'd think, especially to the new ones. They call it natural selection. But really, it's just picking who to break." Vivian gently twisted the bottle cap, then asked quietly, "Then why do you stay?" Nico looked at her, and in his eyes was a sorrow that felt old. "Because I know, if I leave, no one will notice people like you, or like my sister." Vivian froze. "Your sister worked here?" Nico nodded. "Maria. She started a year before me. Trina set her up, just like she did with you. Bryce kept cutting her shifts, messing with her schedule, splitting her hours in half. One day, she just cried and walked out. Didn't say a word." Vivian felt her throat tighten. Maria. She remembered that name once showing up in a resignation report. Just one short line. Reason personal. "What is she doing now?" Vivian asked softly. "Waiting tables at a diner out past the suburbs. Makes half as much. But at least no one calls her lipstick trash." There was no anger in Nico's voice now, just exhaustion, the weariness of watching injustice happen over and over again and being powerless to stop it. Vivian bit her lip. Something inside her heart began to crack open. "Thank you for telling me," she whispered. Nico hesitated a moment, then reached into his pocket. "There's something else you should see." He handed her his phone. On the screen was a group chat titled La Mer Staff Official, but the messages inside made Vivian go cold. "Bryce, manager Lena starts tonight. Another poor little single mum case. Let's see how long this one lasts. Trina, shift lead. I bet she cries by Monday. Bryce, give her the wine test tonight. If she breaks it, even better. Trina, perfect. Let's not let her think she's special. Vivian couldn't take her eyes off the screen. She gripped the phone, as if holding in her hands the living proof of a system that had rotted straight through the bone. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Nico said quietly. "But I thought you should know. That trap. It wasn't an accident. It was a plan." Vivian drew a deep breath. She looked at Nico not as some nameless young staffer, but as the first person brave enough to break the silence. "Why are you helping me?" she asked. Nico gave a small, tired smile. "Because you didn't cry. You didn't run. And because, if anyone has the guts to change this place, it's you." Vivian stood, calm, steady, resolute. "No," she said, "not me." Then she placed her hand on Nico's shoulder, gentle but firm. "It's us." That night, after the restaurant had closed and every last employee had gone home, Vivian stayed behind. She stood alone in the now darkened kitchen, the only light coming from a small rear window, casting shadows across the grease-stained tiles, evidence of years of neglect. Inside her apron pocket were 2 audio recordings, 2 screenshots from a staff group chat, and one name echoing clearly in her mind: Marcus Chen. Marcus was the most influential food writer in Seattle. He was also an old acquaintance, not exactly close, but close enough for Vivian to trust that he wouldn't be fooled by polished surfaces and rehearsed smiles. She took out her phone, dialed. 3 rings. "Vivian. Didn't expect a call from you, especially at this hour. Marcus, I need a favor. A special one. Go on." The next morning, Vivian emailed a dinner reservation for Saturday night under a false name. Table request, section C7, the VIP area. Trina always reserved for high-profile guests. The plan was simple. Let Marcus see firsthand how this so-called 5-star service really worked when the owner wasn't watching. But there was one thing Vivian didn't anticipate. Saturday night. Shift begins. Vivian was ready. Recorder on. Uniform pressed. Eyes sharp. Nico was prepped too, ready to support quietly from behind the scenes. 7:45 p.m. Marcus walked in, wearing a brown coat and a baseball cap. No one recognized him. Vivian watched as he sat at table C7, glanced around, his hands resting on the table, not even touching the menu because he hadn't received one yet. But Trina didn't approach. Instead, she was laser-focused on table C3, where a middle-aged man in an Armani suit was dining alone. Trina leaned in, her voice honeyed and practiced, describing wine like she was hosting a luxury TV segment. Her tone bloomed with passion and experience. Vivian looked back to Marcus. Still no water, still no menu. It had been over 10 minutes. She thinks Marcus is just a regular. And the man at C3. She thinks he's the critic. She's performing. But for the wrong audience. Vivian leaned toward Nico and whispered, "Where's Carmen? She's supposed to cover section C." Trina sent her to the stockroom. Nico murmured, said it was an urgent supply issue. Vivian clenched her jaw. She looked at the clock. 15 minutes. Marcus began tapping his phone, calm, but clearly disappointed. Vivian recognized that look. It was the look of a critic who had already made up his mind. And it wasn't going to be a glowing review. She started to step out from the kitchen, but like a shadow appearing on cue, Bryce blocked the door. "Where do you think you're going? There's a guest who hasn't been served. That's not your concern. But if Lena... This is the last time I'm saying it. If you step out of the kitchen again, you don't come back tomorrow." Vivian looked at him, and for the first time, his eyes didn't hold anger. They held fear. They know something's wrong. What they don't know is that I'm ready to expose it all. She turned back into the kitchen, but her eyes remained fixed on the dining room. 21 minutes. 23. 25. Marcus stood up, walked straight to the host stand, said something brief, then left. No one stopped him. No one apologized. No one cared. Vivian untied her apron and walked out. In the middle of the bustling dining room, under the sparkle of crystal chandeliers, the glint of wine glasses and polished cutlery, she stopped, stood tall, clear, right in the center of the stage they thought belonged only to them. Lena Bryce shouted, "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Vivian turned. For the first time all week she looked him straight in the eye. No bowing, no shrinking. "I'm watching as a guest was ignored for 25 minutes, and watching the two of you banking on no one ever calling it out." The restaurant fell silent. She wasn't finished, but the reckoning had already begun. Utensils froze mid-air. The soft piano soundtrack in the background suddenly felt miles louder, and in the center of it all, beneath the warm glow reflecting off handcrafted Italian tiles, stood a waitress, back straight, gaze locked, no longer Lena Morales, the timid single mum, exiled from the dining room for pouring the wrong wine. She was Vivian Reyes, the founder, the woman who hand-picked the silk drapes, who chose each wine glass, each sterling spoon in this very place. "You're causing a scene during peak hours," Bryce hissed, storming toward her. "Do you want me to call security? Go ahead." Vivian's voice was calm, but it echoed across the room. "And be sure to tell them you're trying to throw out the owner of this restaurant." A small O rippled from the bar corner. Bryce stopped cold, his face drained of color. Trina stood behind him, lips parted slightly like her world had just tilted sideways. "You're..." "What?" Bryce stammered. Vivian reached up and removed her name tag. She flipped it over. The paper backing slid free, revealing a bold line of black ink. Vivian Reyes, founder and CEO. She turned toward the guests, still holding the name tag in her hand. "Apologies for the interruption. My name is Vivian Reyes. I'm the founder of La Merenda, and I've just spent the past 7 days working undercover as a trainee to witness firsthand what I hadn't seen in over a year." She pointed toward Section C. Tonight, a guest sat at that table for 25 minutes. No water, no menu, no greeting, because Trina decided that guest didn't look important enough, and when I tried to speak up, I was threatened, banned from the dining area, and called lipstick trash in the very restaurant I built with my blood, my tears, and 15 years of my youth. Bryce fumbled, eyes darting, trying to claw his way out of the wreckage. Vivian. I can explain. Silence. Her voice struck like steel. You called me a failed experiment. And she, Vivian pointed to Trina, told me I was too old, too slow, too ordinary to belong here. So, let me ask you this. If someone that ordinary could create everything you're standing in right now, then what does that make you? Bryce. The restaurant erupted into applause, not the theatrical kind, the liberating kind. It began in the corner, an older couple who'd been watching since the beginning. Then a group of young diners joined in. Then the entire dining room. Vivian stood in the middle of the rising ovation, but her gaze wasn't on the guests. It was on the staff gathered in the back, the ones who'd once been too afraid to speak. Nico's eyes shimmered. Carmen, the hostess, watched with tears and the spark of something new hope. Tomorrow, Vivian said, her voice lowering, grounding the room. We will have a meeting, but not to figure out who made mistakes. We'll gather to recognize who's been overlooked, who's been silenced, who's been made to feel invisible. Because starting now, no one in this restaurant will ever feel less than the value they truly carry. Bryce opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Trina, face pale as porcelain, turned away, retreating toward the kitchen like she was searching for an emergency exit. But it was too late. The door to the truth had been opened, and no one could close it now. Monday morning, 9:00 a.m., sharp. The glass doors of La Merenda swung open, not to welcome guests, but to begin the restaurant's first ever internal hearing. Vivian stepped inside. No apron, no black uniform. She wore a sharp navy blazer, her hair pulled back, her stride grounded and deliberate. Behind her followed two very recognizable figures in Seattle's business world, Patricia Lynn, a veteran labor attorney who had represented dozens of workplace bullying cases, David Kim, an independent auditor known for exposing wage theft and bonus manipulation schemes. All staff were present. Chairs had been pushed aside and tables rearranged into one long conference setup in the center of the dining room. Trina was absent, called in sick. Carmen whispered, "But her Instagram says she's checked in at a spa." Bryce sat in the far corner, avoiding eye contact, fingers laced together, nails scratching lightly at his palms, a clear tell of a man about to be unmasked. Vivian opened the meeting with a sentence no one expected. "Before we speak about anyone else, I want to speak about myself. I failed, not because I mismanaged profits, not because I misrepresented the brand, and not because I let standards slip. I failed because I trusted the wrong people, and because my silence became part of the harm." She paused, looked each employee in the eye, not as a CEO, but as someone who finally realized that her absence had left them exposed. Now, she turned to Patricia. "Please begin." Patricia opened her briefcase. The metallic click of the clasp echoed through the room like a steel door closing. We are in possession of 3 recorded audio clips containing abusive language, 4 screenshots of discriminatory text messages, and 2 adjusted tip reports with signs of financial fraud. She connected her phone to the restaurant's sound system, and Trina's voice rang out, crisp and undeniable. "You're too old, too slow, and too plain to belong here. We don't need some pathetic single mum dragging down the brand." A sharp exhale came from one of the tables. It was Jake, a server who had endured Trina's cruelty for months. Patricia turned. "Mr. Morrison, were you aware of these comments?" Bryce swallowed hard. I wasn't. I don't condone them. If Trina said those things, it wasn't because I told her to." Vivian raised her hand, stopping him. "And this message," she asked, reading aloud. "Lena, classic charity case. Definitely dodging taxes or undocumented. Bet she cries before Monday. Bryce Morrison." Bryce's face went pale. It was just internal banter. No one took it seriously. "You joke by questioning someone's immigration status," Vivian cut in. "You joke by setting traps so they fail." David Kim opened his laptop, displayed a chart on the screen, 47 tip adjustments over the past 3 months. All signed off by a manager, and 91% of them funneled tip money to Trina Walsh. The entire room went silent, frozen. But David wasn't finished. "We also uncovered 18 false overtime entries limited to just 2 names, Trina and Bryce. Total loss nearly $18,000. Patricia closed her folder with finality. "These records will be submitted to the Department of Labor and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Division." Bryce leapt to his feet. "Vivian, we can talk. We can settle this." "No," Vivian replied, voice calm and final. "You don't understand," Bryce snapped. "I built this revenue. I kept the clients. I held the ratings." Vivian's gaze didn't waver. "No one holds on to anything when what they've built rests on fear." She turned to David and Patricia. "Proceed with termination. Forward the files to the authorities." Bryce was escorted out of the restaurant. There was no applause this time, no triumph, just a deep, solemn silence. The kind that settles after a burden is lifted, after the last lash of the whip is removed from the shoulders of good people. Vivian took a deep breath, looked toward the sunlight pouring in from the front doors. Today, we didn't just remove a person. We cut out a cancer so we can begin to heal. That Monday, after Bryce had left in silence and Trina's contract was formally terminated, Vivian didn't take a lunch break. She stayed, sat in the temporarily closed dining room, and called in every employee in small groups, not to interrogate, but to listen. The first to enter was Carmen, the hostess, Trina once banished to the basement for an urgent task. She was trembling as she sat down. Vivian asked gently, "Do you think you did something wrong?" Carmen lowered her head. I was just following orders. Vivian looked at her gently. And did you ever feel like you had the right to say no? Silence. A single tear slid down Carmen's cheek, not from pain, but from the simple, overwhelming weight of someone finally asking her that question. Later that afternoon, Vivian stood once more at the front of the main dining hall, not as the undercover employee, not even as the CEO, but as a leader ready to rebuild. There were no slides, no background music, no flashy agenda, just a blank whiteboard, with one single sentence written in thick black marker. Starting today, everything resets. Vivian announced a series of irreversible changes. A new anonymous reporting system, so anyone could raise concerns or report abuse without fear of retaliation. Transparent tip distribution, real-time updates, publicly displayed at the end of every shift. Mandatory management training, the end of self-appointed shift leads. Every new manager must complete a 30-day peer review period, evaluated by their team. Flexible rotating schedules, prioritizing fairness for employees with children, students, and those with second jobs. But then, Vivian did something she had never done at any previous staff meeting. She scanned the room, then called out, "Nico, come up here." The young prep cook with curly hair who once welcomed her through the back door rose hesitantly, hands still dusted with chopped herbs. Vivian turned to the staff. "This past week, when I wasn't the CEO, Nico was the only one who helped me. Not because he knew who I was, but because he believed no one deserves to be disrespected. And I believe this. Anyone who has the courage to stand for justice when no one's watching deserves the chance to lead when the lights come on." She turned to the side and lifted a new name badge. Nico Alvarez, Assistant Floor Manager. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was steady, sure, not a moment of drama, but a shared nod of affirmation. That fairness was no longer just a promise. It was now a practice. After the meeting, small groups naturally formed. Some went over to comfort Carmen. Others approached Jake the server, who'd once lost his hours for refusing to fake a signature to offer quiet apologies. Vivian sat in the corner of the room, hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of coffee, watching it all unfold. No need for speeches, no dramatic monologue, no spotlight. Culture isn't taught through signs hung on walls. Culture is nurtured by how one person looks at another as a human being. 1 week later, a new section appeared on the staff bulletin board this week. I want to say, an open invitation for any employee to write anonymously whatever was on their mind. In the first week alone, over 27 messages were submitted, from the simple stockroom door handles loose, to the quietly profound, "I'm grateful that I no longer wake up afraid to go to work." Vivian walked into her office, now left unlocked, no blinds drawn. On her desk sat a framed photo of her and her mother on La Merenda's grand opening day. Beneath it, an old handwritten note, edges yellowed with time. "You can cook anything you want. Just don't let anyone leave the table feeling they didn't belong there." She looked at those words and smiled. Now, Mom can rest easy. The kitchen is clean again. And so is the heart of it. 3 weeks after the quiet revolution, La Merenda was no longer the same place. The walls were still painted soft golden cream. The chandeliers still bathed the tables in gentle light, but the air was completely different. No more shouting behind the line, no more sideways glances, half jokes masking threats. Now, it was whispers of care. "You okay? How was your morning shift? Need me to swap with you?" This transformation hadn't come from a campaign, it had come from presence. Friday night, peak hour. Vivian tied her hair back, slipped into a server's uniform, no longer the faded thrift store black, but the newly redesigned version, elegant, fitted, indistinguishable from what everyone else wore. Her name tag read Eleanor, her mother's middle name. A quiet reminder to herself. Leadership doesn't mean standing above. It means returning to where everything began. She took table 4, a young couple celebrating their 1-year anniversary. As she approached, the woman at the table gasped softly. "Wait, aren't you the woman from that article, the owner who went undercover?" Vivian smiled. "Yes, but tonight, I'm not the owner. Tonight, I'm here to make sure you have a wonderful evening." Each dish she served came with rare attentiveness, not out of fear of getting it wrong, but out of genuine respect for the moment someone chooses to sit down and trust you. While pouring the wine, she chuckled. "Don't worry. I've memorized the table numbers this time." Laughter erupted from the couple. The air warmed instantly. All night, Vivian never stopped moving, helping Carmen seat a rush of guests, wiping a spill for Jake when a glass tipped, ducking into the kitchen to assist Nico with prep when orders piled up. No one told her to. No one expected her to. And that was exactly why they trusted her more than ever. Around 10:00 p.m., as the last guest left, the whole team gathered to share leftover dessert around a communal table. Vivian stood, raised her water glass high to everyone in this room. Vivian raised her voice gently, her glass still lifted, to those who stayed silent, yet still showed up, to those who thought their voice didn't matter, and to those who chose to stay not because they needed the paycheck, but because they believed this place could be better. They clinked glasses. No slogans, no cheers, just the quiet, collective belief that they were rebuilding something out of ashes. Back in her office, Vivian removed her name tag and placed it on the desk. Beside it was a folded note in unfamiliar handwriting from a new staff member. "I never thought a CEO would remember the name of a server, but you did, and that made me believe I'm not invisible." Vivian held the note, read it twice, then placed it beside the framed photo of her mother. Tomorrow, she'd return to the kitchen line. Next month, she'd try the hostess desk, not to evaluate anyone, but to never forget where she started. 3 months later, La Merenda wasn't just surviving the internal crisis, it had become one of the most talked about restaurants in Seattle. Not because of the food, but because of its story. Marcus Chen's article in the Seattle Tribune went viral, headlined, "When a CEO doesn't blame the system but walks into its basement, the only possible outcome is rebirth." That night, Vivian sat alone in her office, once a tower that had shielded her from reality, now a place of reflection. On the desk, the monthly report. 5-star reviews, up 42%. Staff turnover rate down to 0%. And the anonymous suggestion box this week, empty. She let out a soft laugh, not because everything was perfect, but because sometimes silence wasn't a warning. It was peace. A gentle knock at the door. It was Nico. "You're still here?" he asked. "Yeah." She smiled. "You still helping Carmen close out?" "Oh, and someone left a letter for you." He handed her a small envelope, neatly handwritten on the front. From Maria. Vivian opened it slowly. The handwriting inside was soft, deliberate. "You don't know who I am, but I know who you are. You're the one who heard what no one else wanted to hear. That sometimes cruelty doesn't shout. It smiles and whispers orders sweetly. I used to think I was broken, but watching you stand up in that dining room, I knew I wasn't weak. I just needed someone to prove that kindness isn't a luxury." I've started again at a small diner. It's not fancy, it's not grand, but they call me by my name, and for me, that's enough. Thank you for giving us our faith back. Maria Alvarez. Vivian set the letter gently on the desk. She didn't say a word. She simply nodded, as if replying to someone sitting right across from her. That weekend, La Merenda launched a new program, Role Reversal Day. Once a month, managers would switch roles with staff, not for experience, but to remember what it feels like to be on the other side. There were no posters, no email blasts. Yet within 2 weeks, every branch had voluntarily adopted it, because people had seen something powerful. When it starts from the top, it spreads on its own. Sunday night, the tables were cleared, lights dimmed, the last door about to be locked. Vivian stepped out, apron still in hand, pausing at the threshold. She didn't check revenue, didn't review the evening shift report. She just stood there, in the soft amber glow of the streetlight, her hand resting over her chest, right where her name tag used to be. And she whispered to herself, "I used to think leadership meant never being wrong. Now I know. Leadership means having the courage to fix what you once ignored, and sometimes that starts with a tray of water, an apology, or one person willing to walk back through the door they once blindly passed by. When you walk into a restaurant, the server might not remember your name, but you'll always remember how it felt when someone looked at you like you weren't less than anyone else in the room. That feeling can't be measured in Michelin stars. It doesn't hang framed on a wall. It's culture. And at La Merenda, it started with someone brave enough to wash dishes and listen. So if you ever feel unseen, don't believe for a second that you're not worthy. It may just be you're standing in the wrong place, under the wrong light. Because the truest light doesn't come from a spotlight. It comes from the way you rise for what's right, even when no one is watching. And sometimes, to change an entire system, all it takes is one person willing to listen in a cheap uniform.